Welcome to my channel, ketomealsandrecipes.com. Today I will show you how I make Lupin Flour Lasagna Pasta. This pasta is low carb, keto, gluten-free, and grain-free. This pasta is so delicious that even my non-keto family members think I just made regular homemade lasagna. They say that it tastes amazing and is very close to regular wheat-based lasagna pasta. And just as a heads up, in my next video, I'm going to use this lasagna pasta to make my family's favorite Italian-based lasagna. If you would like to support me and learn as much as you can about the process, please watch all the way through the video because I share tips and information as I'm making the pasta. And by watching the entire video, you learn everything you need to know to ensure that your efforts are successful every time you make the pasta. To help you understand the macronutrient ratio for this full batch of 8 sheets of lasagna pasta, which is 1.2 to 1, it has 9.3 grams of total carbs, 8 grams of dietary fiber, resulting in only 1.3 grams of net carbs for all 8 sheets. That's absolutely amazing. For best results, I'm going to be using a relatively inexpensive Italian-made pasta machine. It will result in a much thinner and more even consistency for each strip of lasagna. I've posted the link for this machine in the description box as well as the written recipe. But you can also make it without a pasta machine. I will explain how to later on in the video. Now let's get started. To a mixing bowl, add the Lupin flour and the glucomannan or konjac root powder. If you're not familiar with glucomannan, another name for it, as I mentioned, is konjac root powder, and this powder acts like gluten to hold the pasta together and is better, in my opinion, than xanthan gum. Unlike xanthan gum, glucomannan is all natural. It is made from a plant that has been dried and ground to a fine powder and is absolutely amazing for all your keto, low-carb, gluten-free baking. And also, this amazing powder also acts like a starch or tapioca flour, which you can use to thicken up your sauces and stews. And unlike xanthan gum, it does not leave a slimy texture. And then whisk to combine these two until the glucomannan is well integrated. Next, pour the whisked eggs into a bowl and stir to form a rough dough. You'll notice that the dough is quite sticky when you first start out. To develop the dough, knead for about 5 to 6 minutes or until the dough is smooth and not sticky anymore. If you find that the dough is hard or still crumbly, you can soften it up by adding 2 to 3 teaspoons of ice cold water. It's important that the water is very cold and knead really well to incorporate and hydrate the dough before adding any more water. What you want is for your dough to be soft and pliable but not wet and sticky. When the dough has reached a nice texture, roll and form the dough into a ball. Place it into a bowl, then cover the bowl with a tea towel, not cling wrap. You don't want to trap in the moisture. And then just allow the dough to naturally rest and hydrate for about 10 to 15 minutes. My dough has rested, so I'm going to cut the dough ball into 2 halves. It's easier to work with a smaller quantity. And just return the unused dough into the bowl and cover up with the tea towel again. Now, sprinkle and distribute about 1 to 2 teaspoons of Lupin flour onto your countertop or on whatever surface you're going to be using. The nice thing about this dough, it behaves just like regular wheat-based dough. Now knead the first half of the dough to soften it and make sure that the dough is not sticking to your hands. If it's sticky, sprinkle a little bit of Lupin flour on top of the dough. Then use a rolling pin to flatten the pasta dough. The next thing I do is I dust the top of the pasta just a teeny tiny bit and use either a pizza cutter or knife to trim the dough into a nice rectangle. This will make it easier to pass through the machine. Set your pasta machine, which is set to its lowest setting. The lowest setting on this machine is 0. Before feeding it through the machine, sprinkle both sides of your rectangle with Lupin flour. This will prevent your dough from sticking to the rollers or fraying. If you like homemade pasta, I highly recommend that you get a pasta machine because you'll get the most even, thin, and consistent results. After passing the dough through once, fold the dough into 3 overlapping layers, feed it through the machine again, still at the lowest setting. If you notice that the dough is starting to get a little bit sticky, don't forget you have to dust it almost every time between each time you pass it through the machine. Then repeat the process of folding and passing it through 2 more times. Next, adjust the dial by 1 setting at each time that you pass the dough through the machine. And don't forget, you really should dust the dough on both sides each time you pass it through the machine. When you notice that your dough strip is getting a little bit too long, just cut it in half. Set 1/2 aside and keep adjusting the setting. Then working with just 1/2 of the dough, keep adjusting the setting 1 level higher each time you pass the dough through. Then repeat until you get to setting 5, or a thickness of 1.5 millimeter or 0.6 of an inch. You'll notice that the pasta is quite thin at this point. However, when you're working with the pasta, sometimes you'll notice that the edges of the pasta while rolling get very ragged and uneven. Here you have 2 options of fixing the situation. The first way, if the edges are too ragged, the simplest way is just trim or cut off the ragged ends. It depends how the pasta is forming, but if I need to, I like to trim just a tiny bit of the ragged end, then use the scraps to reinforce or fix any edges that need to be adjusted, and then pass it through the machine again. The second way is, if you've put your pasta through and haven't trimmed it, just keep pressing it until the pasta is as thin as you want, and then at the very end, and then just at the end, trim the edges. Once you've completed each sheet of pasta and you're happy with it, just place the pasta on a tea towel and let it air dry while you make the rest of your pasta. One more thing, if you have a bit of time and you want to make this pasta as prep ahead, that's really easy. Just make it and trim it and place it on a flat sheet that will fit into your freezer. Place a parchment sheet down and put 1 layer of pasta on this sheet. Place another sheet of parchment paper and repeat until all your pasta is on this sheet. Then transfer to a freezer and leave it there until the pasta is completely frozen. Then store in an airtight freezer-safe container, preferably plastic or glass because otherwise your pasta might break. This frozen lasagna will last in your freezer for several months. To thaw, just take it out of the freezer, leave it on your counter, and then use in your lasagna recipe. For each batch of lasagna, if you're wondering how many lasagna sheets you're going to need for my lasagna recipe, you will need 8 sheets in total, 2 per layer for 4 layers. Those of you who are not familiar with Lupin flour, you may be wondering why I'm using Lupin flour. First of all, I love using Lupin flour because Lupin flour is gluten-free and high in protein and also has a high percentage of both soluble and insoluble fiber. So it's exceptionally good for keto diets because we don't tend to get enough fiber. But please note that lupin has a potential allergenic effect for people with peanut allergies, so please be conscientious if you do have peanut sensitivity or allergy. Pasta without a machine. All you have to do is follow the steps in step 1 and step 2, which I've already explained. Then use a rolling pin. Fold it in 3, roll it into a nice thin layer, repeat that 2 more times, then roll out until the pasta is nice and thin. In other words, 0.6 of an inch or 1.5 centimeters thick. And the length should be about 10.5 inches or 27 centimeters long. I would really appreciate it if you would let me know if this Lupin Flour Lasagna Pasta recipe is something that is useful to you in your low-carb, keto, gluten-free diet. And also, if you have a moment, leave me a comment and let me know what other types of pasta you would like me to make, and if you've worked with Lupin flour, whether you like it or not. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch my video. I really appreciate your support. Another way to support my channel is by forwarding the link to this recipe or my channel to someone that you also think might enjoy my recipes. Most important of all, I hope you come back when I post my next video, which is going to be my family's favorite keto low-carb gluten-free lasagna, which is based on my mom's Italian recipe. Until next time, have a happy and healthy day. Cheers!